So everything was fine, really fine. My wife had the whole kitchen under control. She's orchestrating this tiny orchestra of pans and spices. I'm just the guy holding a wooden spoon wondering if I should stir something or just nod approvingly. And then she looks at me, just that look, and says, "Can you help me?" And I, being the genius I am, think, oh, I can help. This will be great, which is my first mistake. I mean, you ever tried to help in someone else's perfectly choreographed system? It's like walking into a hurricane with an umbrella. I start chopping vegetables, which is dangerous because apparently the knife has feelings and knows I'm about to ruin its life. Then I decide I'll help with the pasta. Sounds simple, right? Boil water, throw pasta, done. Except somehow I managed to set off the smoke alarm, flood the counter, and create a noodle tsunami on the floor, all within 5 minutes. My wife, she's just standing there, not panicking, not yelling, just watching, which is worse than yelling because it's like a silent courtroom of judgment. And the thing is, I thought I was fixing things. I thought I was being helpful. But now I'm kneeling on the kitchen floor, soaked in water, holding soggy noodles, thinking maybe next time I'll just open a bag of chips. And then she says something like, "It's fine," which is the universal lie in marriage. And suddenly I realize nothing is fine. I mean, she's still standing there like she's auditioning for a documentary called How to Remain Calm When Your Husband Destroys Everything. So I just smile, nod, try to mop up, but of course, every movement I make just adds another layer of chaos, and I think maybe I should call someone like a professional or maybe the fire department. And that's when I see the spaghetti sauce, which has taken on a life of its own, creeping across the counter like it's claiming new territory. And I think to myself, maybe helping wasn't the best idea after all. But hey, at least I tried, right? Everything was fine, really fine. The kind of fine that makes you think life has paused just to let you enjoy a perfectly normal Tuesday. My wife was in the kitchen, moving around like she had rehearsed this exact routine for years, opening cabinets and pulling out ingredients with the kind of grace that makes it look effortless. She's humming a little song under her breath, not that anyone asked her to, just because apparently she enjoys cooking and chaos is her playground. And there I was standing in the doorway, holding a wooden spoon like it was some ceremonial wand that might summon disaster, which in hindsight, it probably would. I was careful not to breathe too loudly because you can't disrupt the natural order of someone else's kitchen without consequences. This is a rule I have clearly learned the hard way in every other attempt to help around the house. The counter was perfectly organized, spices in a line, knives in a row, vegetables chopped with the precision of someone who might have a second career as a ninja. I swear I even noticed the little towel folded just so, the way it hugged the edge of the counter as if it had a purpose beyond drying hands. And I'm just standing there thinking I could help. I probably shouldn't, but I could, because that's how it always starts, right? That innocent thought, that spark of overconfidence that tells you, yes, you can jump into this carefully choreographed system and improve it somehow, and you can't see the disaster lurking in the 5-foot radius around your feet. I take a step closer to the counter, trying to act like I belong in the same space as someone who clearly knows exactly what they're doing. And it's a precarious balance of pretending competence while secretly being terrified of touching anything. She glances at me and says something casual, like, "Can you hand me that?" And I immediately imagine myself in a heroic montage where I smoothly pass the ingredient and everything continues perfectly. Instead, my brain decides this is the perfect time to overcomplicate things, to invent an unnecessary method of handing over a spoon that requires 3 steps and a spin for flair. Meanwhile, she's humming the same little tune, oblivious to my impending disaster. And I can't tell if she's smiling because she's entertained or because she already knows what's coming. I'm frozen for a second, just soaking in the calm, because that calm is so deceptive it almost feels like a warning sign. The kind of calm you see in nature documentaries right before the predator jumps. And in that pause, I start thinking about all the other times I tried to help and how none of them ended with applause. Just awkward silence and slight eye rolls, and somehow that makes me more confident. Which is the weirdest part? Confidence fueled by past failure, thinking this time will be different. And as I take another step, trying to match her rhythm, everything in the room, the cutting board, the vegetables, the faint smell of garlic feels like it's daring me to ruin it. And I tell myself, no, this time it'll be fine. Everything is fine. But that phrase hangs in the air in a way that makes you want to question it. Because in moments like this, the universe has a funny way of setting up its punchline. So I decided to help, which in hindsight was probably the single worst idea I've had that week. That week included accidentally coloring my socks in the laundry with a red shirt. I stood there thinking, this is my moment. Do this, I'll be helpful. I'll be the hero of the kitchen. That's the problem with thinking like that. You always overestimate yourself. My wife glanced at me, smiled that tiny, knowing smile she gives when she's already prepared for the impending disaster, and said, "Can you grab the cutting board?" And I immediately felt like James Bond, only with less elegance and more anxiety. I reached for it, trying to act casual. Apparently, my casual looked a lot like a cross between a giraffe learning to use a trampoline and a man who had never held a cutting board in his life. Held it too close to the counter at first, then too far, like I was negotiating some invisible line of kitchen law that didn't exist. Every movement felt like a high-stakes operation that could set off an avalanche of chaos. She didn't intervene, which is usually a bad sign because silence in a kitchen is either contentment or judgment. And in this case, it was judgment masked as contentment. And so I chopped my first vegetable, which seems simple, right? Chop a vegetable. I have this uncanny ability to turn simplicity into a production worthy of a reality TV fail compilation. One wrong angle, a slightly too enthusiastic downward motion, and I nick a finger just enough to make it feel personal, but not enough to cause real damage. So the pain is psychological, which is even worse. I look up, expecting sympathy or at least recognition of my effort, and she's still moving like a calm, controlled whirlwind, stirring sauce and arranging bowls, completely unfazed, which is exactly the kind of response that makes you question all your life choices. I decide to move on to pasta, which is water and noodles, a basic concept I have successfully executed countless times when no one is watching. But now, under pressure, boiling water feels like I'm trying to tame a dragon. I pour the noodles in, thinking I'm fine, only to realize I've used the wrong pot, so now the water is boiling over and spilling onto the stove, which makes a hissing sound like it's personally scolding me. And I know it's coming, the smoke alarm, the frantic scramble, the silent judging. And I think, hey, maybe I overstepped, but it's fine, I'm fine. But every step I take, every move I make, the kitchen seems to conspire against me. Even the spices look like they're leaning in, waiting for me to mess up. pick up a knife to help with the garlic, trying to be precise, and it slips slightly, which is one of those little moments that feels like slow motion. I'm frozen for a second, realizing that my helpfulness has transformed into a very real hazard, and my wife, she just watches, humming, maybe enjoying this more than she should. And I think this is supposed to be easy. I'm just helping. How is this happening? Yet, I keep going because backing down now would be admitting failure, and that is not an option. Even as the smoke begins to curl around my head and the noodles are forming little islands of doom on the stove, and somehow the cutting board is wet in a way that makes no sense, and I think maybe helping isn't as simple as it seems. So now, I'm in full mode, which is really just a polite way of saying disaster in slow motion. I start with small actions because logically, that's how you ease into helping, right? You chop a little onion here, stir a little sauce there, maybe put a few noodles into the pot. Sounds harmless. But of course, every one of these small actions has consequences I didn't consider. I slice the onion, and suddenly my fingers are in a negotiation with the knife that neither of us is winning. And I swear the onion is mocking me like it knows I'm about to make a bigger mess. I toss it into the pan, which seems fine, except I didn't account for the oil sizzling exactly like it wants to burn me personally. I stir, I adjust, I move the pan slightly to the left, and the counter is now slick with something I can't identify, maybe oil, maybe my dignity, maybe the universe's way of saying, relax, you're not helping. Then I move to the pasta, which should be straightforward. Boil water, add noodles, stir occasionally. That's a simple algorithm I've executed hundreds of times, except somehow, under observation, the pasta doesn't behave normally. The water bubbles over, I knock the lid, noodles stick together. It looks like some abstract art project gone wrong. I glance at my wife, who's casually stirring sauce, humming the same tune, completely unfazed, and that's when I realize she's like a calm eye in the middle of a storm that I just created. I reach for the garlic to mince, thinking, how hard can it be? And that's the point where physics decides it's time to intervene. The knife slips slightly, the garlic shoots across the counter, lands in the sink, which causes a splash that goes everywhere, and I freeze because even the sink seems to be judging me now. Every tiny move I make has this exaggerated, almost cinematic ripple effect. I stir one pot, and somehow the other pot tilts slightly, spilling water onto the counter and forming a puddle that immediately becomes a hazard zone. I try to clean it up, but every towel I pick up just shifts the chaos around like I'm playing a game of whack-a-mole with disaster. The noodles, they're not just noodles anymore. They've become sticky, rebellious, sentient little creatures that are escaping the pot and claiming territory on the stove as if they know I have no control. My wife is still humming, still in rhythm, still untouchable, which somehow amplifies my panic. I realize at this moment that helping, which started as a noble small intention, has escalated into a full-blown physics experiment, a test of balance, coordination, and human patience. And as I'm reaching for the next ingredient, trying to salvage the situation, see the little things, tiny droplets of sauce, a misplaced cutting board, a knife standing like it's judging me. And I think, how did small actions turn into this? And of course, there's a lingering feeling that no matter what I do next, the chain reaction won't stop. Because once the dominoes start falling in a kitchen, there's no picking them up quietly. At this point, the real kicker is the silent judgment, which is somehow worse than yelling. My wife is just standing there, humming, chopping, moving through the kitchen like she's on autopilot. And every time I make a movement that I think might be helpful, catch her glance, not a glance full of panic, not a glance full of anger, but that calm, calculated look that says, I'm watching you carefully, and I know exactly what's about to happen, but I'm letting you try anyway. Nate Bargatze fashion, it's not that she's angry, it's worse, because silence carries weight. It's like a courtroom without a judge, but the jury is all eyes, all observation. I'm the defendant about to unintentionally commit multiple culinary crimes. I chop a vegetable, trying to compensate for the mess I've already made, and her eyes follow me, and I feel like there should be a soundtrack with a suspenseful chord whenever I move, because every motion has consequences that I don't even understand yet. And that's when it really hits me. She's letting me fail just enough so that I learn something, or maybe just for her own entertainment, which is crueler than any verbal scolding. I try to sneak a little action that I think she won't notice, like adjusting a pan or moving a spoon. And of course, that's when the universe intervenes, and a noodle escapes the pot, lands in the sink, and splashes onto the counter, which in turn sends droplets flying across my shirt, my pants, maybe even the dog, if he's standing too close. And through it all, she's calm, humming, chopping, doing her thing like I'm just a minor side effect of the kitchen's perfect ecosystem. It's terrifying because the calmness hides a judgment that's sharper than any words. I reach for the cutting board, thinking, maybe if I just act normal, this will look intentional, and naturally, the knife slips slightly, rolls off the counter, and I think, well, that was expected. And yet she doesn't react, no sigh, no comment, smart, just that quiet, attentive presence that somehow makes me sweat more than yelling ever could. It's like being in a slow motion movie where you know the building is about to collapse. Everyone else is sipping coffee in the background, pretending nothing is wrong. Every small attempt to regain control is met with this serene observation, and it makes you overthink everything. Do I stir faster? Should I even move my hand? Should I apologize preemptively? And that's the brilliance of the silent judgment. It's the comedic goldmine because it builds tension naturally. The audience feels it too, imagining themselves in that kitchen, feeling the weight of someone calmly, watching their every move, knowing they're about to witness chaos unfold. And I reach for the garlic again, trying to prove myself. And of course, it slips slightly, falls into the water, bubbles up like a miniature geyser, and I realize nothing I do here goes unnoticed. Every movement is amplified by her calm. The humor isn't just in the disaster. It's in the fact that she's watching it all unfold like a very patient, very amused scientist, and I think maybe the silent judgment is the worst form of punishment. And of course, just when I think I might be regaining control, the chaos escalates in ways that feel completely unfair, which is classic. I reach for the sauce, thinking, okay, I've got this. How bad can it be? That's when the universe decides to remind me that small actions have enormous consequences. I stir the pot, just a simple, polite stir, and suddenly sauce splashes up, drips onto the counter, onto the floor. They're smart, maybe even onto the dog if he's standing too close. And I freeze because the sauce seems to have taken on a life of its own. Creeping into corners like it's claiming new territory, like some tiny red liquid empire. The noodles, which were supposed to stay obediently in the pot, are now forming little sticky islands, some sticking to the edge, some escaping completely. I watch in horror as one noodle curls around the handle of a pan like it's tying a noose around my confidence. I pick up a towel to try to clean the counter, which should be simple, right? But as soon as I do, the water from the spilled pasta slides around, and somehow the towel just moves it elsewhere. So I end up chasing droplets across the counter like a very confused, slightly desperate janitor. There's the cutting board, which I swear has developed a mind of its own. It's wet, slippery, and I try to stabilize it while still mincing something, and suddenly I'm performing some kind of interpretive dance with a knife. Vegetables and my own fingers trying to maintain dignity while the kitchen seems determined to sabotage me at every turn. Through all this, my wife is still calm, still humming, still moving like a perfect rhythm machine. And it's terrifying and hilarious at the same time because her calmness amplifies every mistake I make. The smoke alarm goes off for a second, just a little chirp, and it's like the soundtrack to my doom. And I glance at her expecting maybe panic, maybe laughter, maybe judgment, and she just keeps going, totally unfazed, which makes me panic more because if she's calm, the situation must be far worse than I imagined. And somehow, in this chain reaction of spilled water, noodles, sauce, and minor knife mishaps, I start thinking, why did I think helping was a good idea? And yet, I keep going because stepping away now would admit failure. Admitting failure in front of someone calmly watching you unravel is somehow the worst humiliation imaginable. I try to stir again carefully, but my movements are exaggerated, almost like a puppet whose strings are tangled. Every tiny shift in my hand seems to produce a new disaster. The sauce jumps again. Noodles stick to the wall. Water spills in a new direction. And I feel like the universe is testing me, testing my patience, testing my ability to survive small kitchen catastrophes without losing my mind entirely. And while all of this unfolds, the audience watching would feel the tension, the suspense, the relatable terror of trying to help when your help is inherently doom. The humor isn't just in what I'm doing, it's in the way I'm panicking, the way I overthink, the way I keep trying to salvage the situation while making it worse. Every moment is like a delicate balance between disaster and comedy that keeps everyone leaning forward, wondering what could possibly happen next. Because once small actions start causing chaos, there's no stopping it, navigating it poorly, and laughing while doing so. By now, I've fully accepted that my attempt to help has morphed into something unrecognizable, like a low-budget disaster movie playing out on my kitchen counter, and yet there's no turning back because I'm already in motion, hands flailing, trying to save noodles, sauce, water, and somehow what's left of my dignity, all at the same time. I pick up the spoon, thinking maybe if I just stir the sauce gently, regain some semblance of control, but the sauce doesn't cooperate. It jumps, splashes, dribbles down the side of the pan like it has a vendetta against me personally, which makes me pause mid-stir to reconsider all of my life choices that led me to this very moment. The noodles, once obedient and calm, are now sticking to everything, some hanging over the pot, some tangled into a sticky mass on the counter. And I start imagining them as tiny spaghetti creatures plotting an uprising. I try to scoop a rogue noodle back into the pot, only to knock over the garlic bowl, which sends cloves scattering across the counter and into the sink, where one of them bounces in a puddle and makes the water ripple like a tiny, angry pond. Meanwhile, my wife is still moving in rhythm, the same calm tune, completely untouchable, which somehow amplifies the chaos because now I know she's silently judging every misstep I make which makes each noodle, each splash, each errant droplet feel like an epic event in a slow motion nightmare. I glance at the cutting board, which has shifted yet again, and realize that no surface in this kitchen is stable anymore. It's like the floor has become quicksand and the counter has joined the conspiracy. I attempt a rescue operation with the towel, trying to absorb the water before it spreads further. But every swipe seems to move the problem from one place to another. And I start questioning physics, reality, and whether I'll ever be allowed back in the kitchen. Just as I think I'm getting a handle on things, I notice the sauce creeping closer to the edge of the counter, threatening to drip onto the floor where it would likely form a small lake of tomato-based destruction. I leap to intercept it like some kind of overdramatic action hero who is not very heroic at all. My wife glances at me just slightly, and I swear it's that exact fraction of a look that tells me she knows everything is about to spiral again. I knock over a measuring cup, water spills, sauce splashes, noodles escape. I realize I'm fully enveloped in this chaotic ecosystem I created. I can't stop because every attempt to pause or retreat seems to escalate things even more. I find myself narrating in my head like a sports commentator. Here he goes, attempting a rescue on the rogue noodle, approaching the sauce spill, narrowly avoiding a garlic disaster. Oh no! He's tripped over his own pride, and somehow, that's where the comedy lives, in the perfect storm of misjudgment, overconfidence, silent observation, everyday objects turning against me, each tiny misstep a punchline that builds on the last, keeping everyone leaning forward, laughing and wondering just what could possibly happen next in this kitchen that is clearly not my friend. So, in the end, I stand there, surrounded by noodles clinging to the counter like they're staking claims, sauce in places I didn't even know existed, water puddles that could probably support small boats, and my wife still humming like she's performing in a one-woman calmness concert while I've become the entire chaos section of the orchestra. I realize something very important: helping isn't always about fixing things. Sometimes, and they're smart, it's about surviving long enough to tell the story. And maybe, just maybe, the real disaster was thinking I could help it all without turning a Tuesday into a full-blown episode of kitchen catastrophes. The Nate Bargatze edition.